Chapter 6. More Than Double Vision. Thursday, 7:15 a.m. The Fountain in the Courtyard Square. Earlier in the morning. The reflection of the dark blue morning light twinkled faintly in the fountain water. Resident Perceive sat on the edge of the fountain, only half awake. A couple feet away, Resident Grace also sat on the fountain, playing with her hair, an absent expression on her face. The song of a bird could be heard coming from the large tree that overspread the fountain. It was peaceful and quiet as two more residents meandered in the marble square, talking in low tones. Resident Perceive, wishing to clear the fog from his head, began to briskly wash his face in the cold water of the fountain. The crispness of the early morning made his wet face feel slightly chilly. Rubbing her eyes a little, Resident Grace moved a little closer to Resident Perceive. Before she could say anything, Resident Leary abruptly walked by, heading to the market. "Good morning, residents," Leary greeted them. Before they could respond, he went on. "I would stay and talk, but I need to get something at the market before I head to my post at the Gate of Hearing. I guess I'll talk to you both later." "See you later, Resident Leary," they both replied. A perplexed look crossed Resident Grace's face after Resident Leary went on his way. "Is something wrong?" asked Resident Perceive.
"Why is it that I feel uneasy around the market, unlike the towers or the gates?"
"What do you mean, Grace?" Resident Perceive inquired softly.
"I know the vendors, and I know what they sell. So why should I feel uneasy when I am there? It is like I feel like I am being spied on when I am there, as if there were spies there."
"What made you think of that?" asked Resident Perceive.
"Oh, it's just that Resident Leary is headed in the direction of the market, like you said, and it reminded me of the uneasy feeling I get when I am around the marketplace."
"Well, don't worry too much," replied Resident Perceive in an attentive tone as he rubbed his eyes with more water. "With Resident Cautious as the head inspector, it's hard to imagine many of the enemy's spies infiltrating this castle. Although, unfortunately, it is not impossible. It won't be too long now before the meeting will start. Whoever he chooses as acting head inspector will certainly have a challenge on their hands."
"That is true,"
agreed Resident Grace as she nodded with a blank stare while dangling her fingertips in the fountain water.
"Between the two of us, no castle is impregnable to pernicious accuser without the aid of Creator King."
"Very true, Grace. We best keep this in mind. I think I am in the mood to look for some barley bread, and maybe a little bit of olive oil to go with it."
"Not exactly a warm morning, is it?" remarked Resident Rye, shivering a little as he limped beside Resident Candid.
"Well, it is not what I would call chilly, although it has been slightly warmer on previous mornings,"
replied Resident Candid, pulling his collar closer to him.
"Those two residents sitting in the fountain, directly across the square. I can't see who they are from here. Can you tell me?"
asked Resident Candid as he rubbed his hands together. "It appears to be Resident Perceive and Grace. Birds of a feather flock together," replied Resident Rye half under his breath. "I can't say that I have always agreed with their views on the king," Resident Rye continued with coolness in his voice.
"How so?"
asked Resident Candid, although he half knew the answer. "Well," said Resident Rye, "I had a disagreement with Resident Perceive not long ago about the wall. It is incredulous they help to maintain it, yet they seem more willing to trust this king from the glorious capital city, if he or it even exists, without even considering if this wall could be penetrated. It is surprising that they have so little faith in this wall which they help to maintain. As such, I can't help but be suspicious about their sincerity. I look at this wall and can hardly take them seriously when they consider the idea of any force breaking through. If they were making a joke, I would laugh."
"Well, since you are the head of this wall's maintenance and fortification, I can understand how that would make you feel."
Resident Candid commiserated with a shrug.
It is difficult when people, or other residents do not take your efforts seriously.
Well, Candid, they may be well-meaning, but sometimes it's hard to deal with. Well, there goes Perceive, headed to you-know-where. I guess we should make our way in that direction as well.
Very true, Resident Rye. Where are you headed after that?
Oh, I think I'll take a walk around the castle for a while before I begin my duties.
Well, that was not a very long meeting.
Resident Grace commented.
No, it was not.
Replied Resident Perceive.
Is that all you have to say?
What do you mean by that, Resident Grace?
Well, aren't you going to tell me? Or is it your plan to keep me in suspense?
Resident Grace exclaimed.
You will find out at some point.
Well, at some point, I will also discover that I need some sleep, too.
Well, since you are curious, I will tell you who he chose to be the acting head inspector in his absence, although I am not sure I am comfortable with his choice. Well, what do you know? I should be getting to the Gate of Hearing. I need to begin collecting reports, and
Are you going to leave me hanging?
Resident Grace sighed.
Well, okay. I guess I can head to the Gate of Hearing after I tell you.
Thursday, 7:40 a.m., near the guardhouse of Smell. As they headed towards the main tower, Resident Resolve and Alien Constant talked together.
Did it take you a long time to get here?
Asked Resident Resolve as he and Alien Constant passed a tower.
It did not take too long, relatively speaking.
Replied Alien Constant.
Your fellows have never really told me where they or you are from. For some reason, I am never able to hear them well when they respond to this question. As an inspector, I would normally be overly curious. But since I have known them for a while now, I'm not suspicious at all. However, I do suspect that they have had dealings with the king in the glorious capital city. Though, of course, I'm not sure of this. They seem to always shy away from the question, so I don't really bring it up much.
Well, Resident Resolve, it has been my experience that yes, knowing where someone is from is useful. Yet, as the old and trusted passage says, by their fruits you shall know them. Even if their words did not tell us anything, people can be known by their actions.
Why is it Alien Constant that you and your fellows do not want to become residents? They would be such a benefit to Finite Castle.
I believe, Resident Resolve, that they do not want to be connected with or mistaken as something they are not. We know that we are not residents, and we have no intention of making true residents believe that we are. It is no secret to you, Resident Resolve, that there are forces that desire to harm castles like Finite, and residents such as yourself. You know that masks, subterfuge, and trickery are the disguises of choice. These infamous characters are treated partially as a threat in this castle and partially as a joke. We have no desire to appear as what we are not, and we are not residents. Therefore, we do not register to become residents.
You know, I have never before heard it put that way, but it makes me feel good. I don't always know why Alien Zeal, Bold, and yourself are here, but at least I know that you have good intentions.
Well, Resident Resolve, again, you will know someone by their actions.
That is something Alien Bold told me once, and something I have also read in the Plaques.
Resident Resolve replied.
I find that it is true whether you are speaking of a castle or a resident.
It is a good safeguard, and in my experience with other castles and residents, I would agree with you.
Alien Constant agreed.
I was wondering,
said Resident Resolve.
How many castles have you had dealings with?
At that moment, a war trumpet sounded from the direction of the Gate of Hearing.
That sound came from the Gate of Hearing,
said Resident Resolve, whipping around.
I'm sorry, Resident Resolve, but it looks as though you may not get much sleep today. That is a trumpet that is warning of an attack.
It is. Well, Alien Constant, I knew this day would come. I just hoped that it would not be so soon. Fortunately, our gates are shut up tight and barred as well.
Your fellow residents will be headed toward the square?
That is the general meeting place, so yes, we should head in that direction ourselves. This is a strange coincidence for you to show up right before an attack.
Resident Resolve commented as they hurriedly headed towards the square.
The king fights for his own.
Thursday, 7:40 a.m. the guardhouse of hearing.
Well, good morning, Presume. Good to see you.
I see you made a stop at the vendor stand, Leary.
Well, Presume, I make it a point to eat something substantial in the morning. I've heard in some places that skipping breakfast is a popular fad, but not one I will ever adopt.
So, Leary, if you're a health nut, why are you eating nuts?
What are you trying to accuse me of, Presume? Being a cannibal? In that case, you better not eat fruitcake.
Ha ha, Leary.
Well, Presume, I want to start out each day in the best way. Besides which, nuts complement bread and fruit. Do you want some?
I see you got some of that dip there with it. I would not say no to some fruit. Where were you before you came here?
Ha, as if you did not know. I was in bed, of course. Apple or orange?
What a shock. Apple, I guess. I think that... Oh, hello, Perceive.
I see that you two are enjoying a good meal.
Would you like some bread, Perceive?
No thanks, I ate not that long ago. I came to collect some reports.
You were collecting reports?
Resident Leary asked in surprise as he handed Resident Presume an apple. Inspector Perceive looked a little uncomfortable, yet held out his hand for a slice of bread, which Resident Leary handed to him.
Yes, it is something that the head inspector told me the other morning.
Acting Head Inspector Perceive replied, biting into the brown bread.
He did not tell you?
Oh, that's right.
Resident Presume replied,
Sorry, Leary. Head Inspector Cautious told me earlier that Perceive here would begin collecting reports, and I forgot to tell you.
Oh, that's right. He would have left for Victor Castle by now. I see. Well, I have not been here very long, so do you have any reports to give, Perceive?
Yes, I do. There's not much to it, and you may find it a bit boring, but here you are.
I should inform you, too, that there is a stranger in the castle who...
At that moment, something near the edge of the forest caught the attention of Resident Leary and Resident Perceive.
Did I say something wrong, Perceive?
Resident Presume asked anxiously.
Hand me the war trumpet.
Say again, Leary?
I need the war trumpet. Look over there, Presume.
Resident Perceive quickly handed the war trumpet to Resident Presume, who handed it to Resident Leary. An unpeeled orange was dropped down over the wall as the war trumpet gleamed with the bright flash from the rising sun. Forcing his eyes from off the emerging figures coming out of the tree line some distance from the castle, Resident Leary turned and blasted a warning in the direction of the marble courtyard of the castle square. Then turning around, he looked a little closer at the group now exiting the forest.
Soldiers,
Resident Perceive replied as if he were reading a recipe.
And by the looks of it, prepared for war.
He observed with a shrug.
Unless they change directions, they will arrive here before too long. It's a good thing that our gates are shut tight.
Well, I'm not too sure. I think I was a little hasty in blowing the war trumpet.
Resident Leary commented, narrowing his eyes to see the group, which was now out of the forest and approaching the castle.
On closer inspection, they do not look like soldiers. From that distance, their numbers and type formation duped me.
I agree, Leary. There must be something wrong with your eyesight, Perceive.
You fellows cannot see that group of armed people?
Yes, Perceive, but don't worry, they cannot be coming to make war.
Resident Leary replied with a mystified stare.
What do you think they were coming for? Don't tell me you can't see all those battering rams, swords, catapults, and crossbows.
What? I see nothing of the kind. They are just a large group of what looks like minstrels, bakers, clowns, jugglers, and actors. What are they coming here for?
Okay, seriously, do you really see that, Presume?
Yes, Perceive, I do. I don't know why there are so many of them or why they're heading in this direction, but that's just what I see.
And yet, Presume, I clearly see a fearsome army that is coming prepared to conquer, not entertain.
I see the same thing here that Presume does,
Resident Leary replied.
Something very strange is going on here.
Resident Perceive mused.
Why is it that the two of you see entertainers and I see soldiers? Perhaps it might help if someone else came up.
But Perceive, what if they see something different from the rest of us? What if they see those people down there in nightshirts with pillows?
Well, Presume, say, there is Resident Rye. Hey, Rye, can you come up here?
Resident Rye quickly limped up the stairs and arrived at the guard tower of hearing, panting and out of breath.
I heard the war trumpet. And for good reason. Look down there,
Resident Leary replied.
What is going on here?
Resident Rye exclaimed.
Did someone decide to have a party in this castle and they forgot to tell us?
A party?
Resident Perceive replied.
You must be kidding. Look at those weapons.
So, Rye, you see the same thing as Resident Presume and I do. Well, why wouldn't I, Leary? I can see some of what that baker has in his basket. I should have thought him to have eaten something before now. Wow, just looking at it makes me hungry. That is the weird thing about it, Rye.
Resident Leary replied, handing him a slice of bread.
Presume and I see what you see. A bunch of people ready to have a party, but Resident Perceive here does not. But his eyesight is better than mine. You cannot see them, Perceive.
That is not it, Rye.
Resident Perceive replied casually.
I see a large group of people. Wow, they're getting close. A large group of people. But they are soldiers, not entertainers. That guy in the front with the mustache has a crossbow.
You mean that guy in the front who is almost at the gate, Perceive? He does have a mustache, but he does not have a crossbow. That thing he has is a harp.
Resident Rye added dryly.
I know you see a harp, but I see a crossbow. Wait, duck!
At that, Resident Perceive quickly ducked behind the wall. Residents Leary, Presume, and Rye did not flinch, but continued to gaze inquiringly and then strangely at Resident Perceive as he cautiously peeked over the wall.
You three should be more careful. That guy just shot at us.
No, Perceive, he did not. The baker behind him threw a breadstick at us. A rather strange gesture.
Perhaps you have eaten too many nuts, Perceive. The three of us see a harmless, albeit organized rabble down there. With all that food and entertainment, why not let them in?
Before we know who they are and what they want? Certainly not. I see an army down there, and, well, there is Resident Resolve over there. Hey, Resolve, can you come up here?
Resident Resolve slowly went up the stairs as if he was in no hurry.
Surprise never sleeps. I was on my way to the main tower when I heard the war trumpet sound.
Resident Resolve replied with a yawn as he neared the top. When he looked outside, he stopped cold in his tracks.
Well, I might have guessed,
he remarked grimly.
But what do you see down there, Resolve?
Resident Rye asked.
Are you kidding? There's an army down there with all manner of weapons. It looks like they are setting up some battering rams.
This is so strange. Why are we saying different things?
Resident Leary wondered out loud.
If we are really seeing different things, then what is actually down there?
Resident Perceive asked, puzzled.
If there is really an army down there like you and Resident Perceive see here, I'm really impressed that you two are not scared stiff.
Resident Leary replied with admiration in his voice.
Well, there's a good reason, Larry, and it has to do with what I and Perceive probably read this morning.
Resident Resolve replied.
What would that be, Resolve?
Resident Presume inquired.
Oh, I know the answer to that. It would be the Plaques, right, Perceive?
Well, yes, Leary.
Resident Perceive replied casually.
However, it looks like they're gesturing. I guess they want to say something to us.
At that moment, Residents Resolve and Perceive heard the loud pounding of a battering ram, while Residents Leary, Presume, and Rye heard the persistent knocking of what they saw as a cane. As a spokesman shouted up to those on the wall, the residents listened to what the host outside the castle had to say. This is what Residents Rye, Leary, and Presume heard and saw. A person who looked like a master of ceremonies took a large cane and made a loud knocking sound on the castle doors. He had a melodious voice and a flamboyant demeanor. Noble residents of Finite Castle, as you can see here, we have items of amusement and articles of confection here for the residents of Finite Castle to take part in and enjoy. Open your gates and you can enjoy all of what you see here. We will not take no for an answer, nor will we fail to entertain you. This is what residents Resolve and Perceive heard and saw. A person who looked like a lieutenant or an officer, he spoke very harshly with many a grimace at Finite Castle.
Noble residents of Finite Castle, as you can see here, we have implements of armor and articles of subjection here for the residents of Finite Castle to give into. Open your gates, and you will be spared the depth of our anger for resisting what you see down here. We will not take no for an answer. And should your answer be no, all you can expect from us are endless attacks and pain, too.
Well, that is a strange invitation. Shouldn't we be the ones to invite them in rather than them inviting themselves?
Resident Leary replied.
Strange Larry? Did you not hear him say that they were in essence bent on our destruction and were going to use force to achieve their goals?
Ha! What are they going to force us with? Resident Resolve? Is he going to batter our walls with that cane down there?
A cane, presume? That is not a cane, and I heard him threaten to attack us, not counting the pain they mean to inflict on us.
Wait a second, residents. So Resolve and I see something different than what you, Rye, Leary, and Presume see down there. And it seems that Resolve and I hear something different than what you three hear.
What are you suggesting that we do about it? You cannot force us to see or hear as you do.
Resident Leary replied.
Well,
Resident Perceive began meditatively.
I move that we do not let them in until we know for sure what is going on down there.
How can we know when we are saying different things?
Resident Leary replied.
Are you sure, Perceive?
Resident Rye asked.
I don't know when I have seen a more harmless group of people.
Well, Rye, we ought to have a meeting in any case to discuss it.
Well, I'm headed off to the Marble Square,
Resident Resolve replied.
I think I'll head in that direction also.
Resident Rye commented.
Good idea.
Resident Presume agreed.
You guys are just gonna leave me here?
Resident Leary asked, half joking.
The privilege of duty, Larry.
Resident Resolve replied with a wink over his shoulder.
Well, I need to head in that direction myself, but first I will need to collect some more reports. So I will see the rest of you there.
See you later, Perceive.
Resident Resolve called out. With that, the residents, except for Leary, headed away from the guard tower of hearing. When he heard the war trumpet, Resident Aspire bolted upright from the position he had been in since he had begun reading the plaques about an hour before. Going down the stairs as fast as he could, he bolted out of the castle's great tower and towards the fountain. When he got there, he saw Resident Grace and sprinted up to her, thinking that there would be other residents not far away. As he got closer, he saw that she was alone, but was saying something to herself.
If I had to be wrong about something, why couldn't it be this?
Resident Grace replied in a shocked tone, shaking her head.
If spies have penetrated this castle, does it have to mean that it is a precursor to an attack?
Hello, Resident Grace.
Resident Aspire quietly greeted her. Her reply was cut off by Resident Candid.
Maybe you should push against the walls in case they are too weak, Grace.
Resident Candid said, rubbing his hands together. Resident Grace gave Resident Candid a long look as if to say, think before you speak, as he came up to her.
Let's not get too excited. So we are under attack. This was going to happen no matter what, and we might as well approach the situation with cool heads.
Resident Grace replied. The battering rams started their barrage on the walls of Finite Castle.
Look at those walls. You cannot even see vibrations,
said Resident Candid with gratified wonder as he gazed at the wall in delight. After thinking for a moment, Resident Grace spoke to Resident Candid.
Resident Candid, we are all very proud of this wall, which you have helped Resident Rye oversee. But why should we expect to test it at the expense of it becoming weaker through prolonged battering?
Well, it appears that there is going to be prolonged battering, or whatever is happening outside, whether we like it or not. So I'm not sure how you expect me to react,
said Resident Candid, who was still rubbing his hands together. Resident Resolve walked up during this verbal exchange.
I hope that we will recognize this as an attack and not an invitation to a party, even though that is just what it looks like on the outside,
Resident Resolve remarked.
I know just where this is going,
said Resident Rye with disgust as he walked up with an obvious limp.
The original for once. Even if what you saw down there was an army, it wouldn't hurt for our walls to take a beating.
This is not about the wall, but about what is outside.
What do you mean? If there is that boom boom that I hear, it must be an army outside.
Yes, Grace, but that is not what everybody is seeing.
Residents are seeing different things, but how could that be?
Resident Grace asked.
Well, Perceive and I saw an army, but Presume, Rye, and Larry saw a cross between a circus and a parade.
So if the majority did not see an army, then perhaps we have nothing to worry about. What are we stressing over?
You should never underestimate your enemy, Candid.
She replied.
It is not only dangerous, but unwise. But if it is an army, then why do you see entertainers out there?
Resident Grace asked.
Candid, I think that the point Grace was trying to make is that the enemy might often take advantage of castles who underestimate him,
Replied Resident Resolve.
What are you all arguing about at a time like this?
Resident Adroit asked.
It is not an argument.
Replied Resident Resolve.
It is merely a difference of opinion.
This crisis outside this castle is what our difference of opinion is about.
And what's not to say that someone of the crisis is not in our castle as well?
Ventured Resident Resolve.
What do you mean by that? Do enlighten us.
What I mean, Rye, is that this group seems to be spreading the seeds of discord in advance of the enemy's entry. It just does not seem constructive to me. Taking a look at our options should have been the first thing we discussed instead of constructive disagreement. What's more is that we need to come to a consensus about who or what is out there and then decide what to do about it. It should be something that will make sense to all of us. We do not actually need any of those things outside the walls. So for the present, we should decide not to let them in until we can come to a conclusion about whom and what they really are.
But if we see and hear different things, how are you going to agree at all, Resolve?
Well, Candid, even though we heard and saw different things, there are some similarities. As Resident Larry pointed out at the time, the group they saw as a conflagration were basically inviting themselves in without asking our permission first. And although the manner was different, the group Resident Perceive and I saw were basically inviting themselves in as well. They both assumed that we will let them in and did not or would not take no for an answer. Could you tell us what you heard, Rye?
Well, Resident Resolve, I heard and hear the persistent knocking of that cane. It has been at least a quarter of an hour, and that master of ceremonies fellow is still knocking on the wall with his cane.
Yes, and I heard a boom, boom. When I looked downward, there was a battering ram not far off, which was directed by the fellow who looked like a disgruntled officer of some sort. The point is, neither of them gave us the option of choosing for ourselves.
That is very true, Resolve.
Resident Grace replied.
If there are two entities, or different sounds of knocking on the wall, and neither showing signs of stopping, maybe the wall is not what we should be concerned about. We should know, however, that our wall is not an indefinite defense. Hopefully, it will become obvious to all of us if there really is an army outside bent on destroying our home and castle.
Well, if hypothetically speaking, the force outside is not interested in a party, but is an actual army, which is unlikely, no force could break through these walls.
Resident Adroit replied.
I think that the likelihood that the conflagration outside is an army is very small. But even if that were so, what other decision is there but to watch the enemy fruitlessly break through these walls? I mean, it is almost comedic. Look at it, everyone. What kind of a chance does a chump like that have against such strength?
At this point, it seems to be the quality of existence that is the issue.
Interjected Resident Resolve.
If it is an army outside, which I did see with my two eyes, we could just wait and watch the enemy try to break through. Or we could rely on a source of power that will not fail to defeat the enemy's plans.
I know. You're going to suggest that we all send a petition to Creator King to save us from the enemy,
Replied Resident Candid, who was rolling his eyes and waving his hands in mockery.
Let's consider, Victor Castle. From what I have heard, Creator King is the Lord of Faint. Rather now, Victor Castle. It has been almost 3 weeks since the attack. It must be nice for them not to have to speculate in uncertainty all the time, whether the king keeps them safe and loves them.
Protections and regulations,
replied Resident Rye.
Well, that actually makes sense to me,
replied Resident Adroit before anyone could continue.
I mean, I suspected as much, but I feel much better knowing that my suspicions have been verified.
I feel the same way,
replied Resident Candid.
Are you two talking in code or something?
Resolve. I believe that the point that Resident Adroit was trying to make was that Victor Castle is more aptly named Boring Castle since the king has become the lord and master of it. As an inspector of wares, this is a rumor I've heard more than any other.
Rye, I would caution against drawing any conclusions based on a rumor. What's more, I refuse to believe that Victor Castle is a boring place,
replied Resident Resolve.
I have talked with Resident Aspire recently, and his description did not match this.
They all turned and stared expectantly with surprised expressions at Resident Aspire, who looked uncomfortable with so many eyes suddenly upon him. He stood looking at them for a few seconds with the looks and sounds of someone fumbling for words. From his hidden view, Artifice glanced directly at Resident Aspire when this was said. For several seconds, it looked like Aspire was working up the courage to reply. But just as he was about to, Resident Perceive came to his rescue.
Well, we do not want to make this young resident here uneasy.
The boom on the walls continued, and for the first time, all of them noticed a very slight crack forming near the Gate of Touch, which was not too far away.
It looks like there is a small crack in the wall,
said Resident Candid in a worried voice. A surprised look crossed the face of Resident Rye as his brows drooped, but he did not say anything.
Maybe we should look around the castle and make sure that there are not any other serious cracks to work on,
Resident Rye suggested. Everyone thought it was a good idea, and gradually they went in pairs to look for any part of the wall that was in dangerous shape.
Resident Grace, I would like to speak with you if I could.
Certainly, Perceive.
Resident Grace replied.
We will go check the wall near the Gatehouse of Sight.
Perceive called out to the others as he and Grace headed off in that direction. The spy, Artifice, lurked in the shadows, waiting to make his move. How much did Resident Aspire know about the recent attack and rescue of Victor Castle? Artifice stood looking sternly at Ploy and Guise.
I think that we will have to work harder in order to prevent interference from the more stubborn residents. Resolve has already caused us a delay in our plans. I believe that we should take stronger measures to ensure that his remarks are not so harmful to our goal. As for Aspire, with enough intimidation and planning, we will make sure he does not get a word in edgewise. Obviously, some of you underestimated the contact that some of these residents have with other castles, like Faint Castle over there.
Artifice, we will watch and try to sabotage any efforts that Perceive, Grace, or Resolve will attempt to abet the enemy in stealing our victim,
replied Ploy.
Very good,
replied Artifice.
This is just what the Colonel would want. Although not informing me, and especially Radiance, that Aspire had been to Faint Castle was a dangerous mistake and foolish blunder. For now, hasten to your duties.